Hello and welcome to Food Allergy Friends Spotlight on Allergy. In this session we are talking with Dr. Nina Markovic from Sydney, Australia about oral immunotherapy and food freedom. Good evening and welcome Nina from Sydney, Australia, who is here to talk about oral immunotherapy and food freedom. Nina has quite a lot of experience of actually using the therapy because her children both have severe allergies and they've worked through the program. So over to you, Nina.
Good morning from Australia, and it's a normal morning, 4 a.m. This is a topic which I can talk about, I guess, day and night. But let's wind back and let's kind of try and talk about definitions. What is oral immunotherapy and perhaps what is not oral immunotherapy? As a mother of two children with anaphylactic food allergies, I was never satisfied, as most mothers are not, with information that there is no cure for food allergy, that your child will always be allergic, that nobody knows why this happens, you should never blame yourself and all that narrative. But it's not good enough on a daily basis, especially when your child starts exploring the world and having continuous reactions. In Australia, we are really behind the rest of the world in this space specifically. We are great with innovation and lots of things, but not when it comes to food allergies on a national level. When my daughter was 2, there was a clinical trial in Melbourne for egg allergy, and she has milk and egg allergy, and milk is everywhere, egg is everywhere. On breads, they put egg white. Baked goods, you really can't relax when it comes to food allergies, but especially milk and egg, and toddlers going to playgrounds and touching everything, and especially butter and those gooey desserts. A lot of that is on the shared equipment, such as playgrounds. So they call us helicopter moms, but in reality, we are moms who have to be attuned with everything around us because of that safety aspect. I don't think that intelligence agencies know yet the value of food allergy mothers. Honestly, they should consider us more seriously, because what a food allergy parent, but mother especially, goes into a space, the first thing is scanning the environment, scanning the actors, scanning what's been offered, and usually declining if it comes to food, and exercising extreme caution and precautions such as wet wipes and all the rest that we all know too well. And then my daughter was not able to qualify for this so-called trial because it was in a different state. And I said, we're going to move the state. Doesn't matter, No, she wasn't suitable. Well, nobody outside Victoria. And then I was told about clinical, not really trials, programs within hospitals in Singapore and Hong Kong. And we were talking about sort of 10 years ago. Little did I know that in the UK and the US and even Croatia and Slovenia in parallel were all these magnificent developments in the food allergy OIT space. So in the US in the late 2000s, they were applying concepts from therapies which have existed for over 100 years when it comes to desensitization to environmental allergens. They were applying the same principles to real foods. This was happening in the US, and as we know, the US, really nothing is public. It's all private, really, privately funded and privately run, even within hospitals. It's the grants, but really America has a different health system to Australia and the UK. In Croatia, interestingly, they were relying on the experiences from Slovenia with anti-venom research in the bee space. Apparently, the highest number of Slovenian bee handlers used to die from anaphylaxis to bee stings. So their research was ongoing in that space, and the basophil activation test, Slovenia was one of the first countries to adopt as part of its efforts to tackle allergy epidemic, not just food allergy. And then in the UK, there were also different places starting their own versions of research. They call it research, but often it's sort of clinical practice with a small number of participants and then looking at the outcomes of that. So all these places were Israel was also one of the places which was quite at the forefront. However, milk in particular, milk allergy seemed to be the hardest one to tackle. So the Singapore and Hong Kong programs actually came to a halt because they couldn't get the milk right. When it comes to the protocols, that is really what matters the most. So it's not just the system and the funding for the system. It is how is the protocol being thought of, firstly designed, and then implemented as well. And then for years I was researching, and there was an article in ABC News about an Australian family which was part of a large cohort of families that was moving to the United States for a year. And it seemed to me like an exodus of mothers and children. So over 70 Australian families would physically move from Australia to Utah for a promising, they called it, food allergy treatment. But we're talking about 70 families over a period of 11 years. Now, that's not a small number. Not a small number at all, especially knowing how far Australia is and how different it is from Utah. For example, coffee is not allowed or not really commonly used in many parts of Utah, being a Mormon country. Australia is the coffee capital of the world. So it wasn't just the lifestyle difference, it was that cost. Because when you're a food allergy parent, leaving your job for a year, leaving your safe space, getting a loan to do this could and did put backwards financially families by many years. Some had to sell their houses, but they did it. And they were coming back with desensitized children, much poorer than before, but with great results and food freedom. Now, the whole concept of food freedom is also quite controversial, I say. There are hundreds of allergists in the US and now globally doing their own versions and different versions of oral immunotherapy. Some even call the ladder approach of baked goods being exposed in a particular way as immunotherapy, but then the oral immunotherapy doctors would argue that's not real immunotherapy. But we can agree that it's a very broad umbrella term, on the other hand, that still doesn't have a consensus in the literature or in practice. But on the other hand, people were coming back to Australia in this case with phenomenal success stories. Yes, EOE, which is a condition which can develop after being exposed to foods that you're allergic to, even if you reach food freedom, has happened to people, and even people with EOE would go to America to undertake this program. So I was in touch with one of the mothers from the article, which I've read, and I followed their family's journey. There were 3 kids from a very small rural town, no funding. The local community gathered and fundraised for their trip to America. And they spent 8 months, mother and 3 children, but father would obviously stay back and send money, because whatever you have in Australia, only half of that would actually count financially in America. So she was responsive to me on social media. So the power of social media is great, despite all the criticism, which is valid, of misinformation. There is so much connection when it comes to food allergy community. I mean, we wouldn't be connected in this way if the technology wasn't advanced as well. So social media in Australia really offered the only hope to many families to be exposed, believe it or not, even to the latest research, because food allergy communities in Australia have been virtual for quite a long time, at least 10 years, before anything was done in Australia in this space. So stories were shared, and parents were the ones really at the forefront. So after a couple of families went to Utah, they started making Facebook groups, and specialized ones, and information sharing and knowledge sharing was phenomenal. They even had a compound, like one building block where Australian families were housed. I mean, incredible, because normally people don't rent apartments for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months at that time. In Utah, you would have annual contracts. But this place saw how desperate Australian families were, and they agreed to have flexible rental contracts to that extent. So the local community in Utah responded very positively to this influx of Australian mums and kids in particular. And Dr. Jones was the lead doctor behind this initiative. It was part of a large Tanner clinic, was called the center, and they were really facilitating Australian families' arrivals in a very informal way. That much exposure in Australia, and also that many Australians and New Zealanders then coming across. So after a while of following this trend, I guess, this was before COVID, I told my husband, perhaps we should be considered. So we had a virtual appointment with the clinic in the US, and we were on the list to go across, and then COVID-19 pandemic shut down Australia's borders, but having such limited movement for many people meant a lot of mental health issues afterwards. And what it meant for food allergy families, probably something else. Whilst the rest of the population was probably not used to such isolation, we as food allergy families have always lived this kind of isolated life. It was just more isolated than usual. So a lot of positive things for food allergy community happened. We all know that sanitizing hands is not going to remove the allergens, but washing the hands will. So a lot of positives for us happened. But at the same time, we were thinking, okay, can we somehow then bring this method from America to Australia? Because obviously we can't leave the country, and children are still reactive, still anaphylactic, still hospitalized many times before the program. So we managed to find a doctor in America out of hundreds of doctors. Dr. Jones, who was the most popular doctor for Australians. That's where most Australians went. It wasn't the only place. There were other places in America, but this was the most established sort of route. And he agreed and bring this method to Australia. So oral immunotherapy in this particular method means gradual exposure to foods which are in such microscopic form that the body doesn't even recognize it initially. So we're talking about like 1,000 of 0.1 mil or 0.1 gram of the food. So to give you, I guess, a comparison, to get to 0.1 gram of any food or 0.1 mil, it would take you 6 to 8 months in this protocol. So it's a very conservative and slower approach, but using real foods and without any products and the highest allergenic component. So if it's roasted, if it's peanuts, it's roasted peanuts, not boiled peanuts. If it's egg, it's liquid egg white, so the most powerful component of that. If it's milk, it's not camel's milk, it's actually cow's milk, which is the most commonly used, because some programs in the States use, for example, all different types of milk before you get to the cow's milk, which would take you 4 years, a lot of patience and question marks in the process. So it's a very scary thing deciding to embark on such a thing, I guess, as a family. Firstly, you are going into this without knowing whether your child will succeed. So you have this interesting psychological moment of seeing success stories, seeing other people graduating, young and old, but then you don't know how your child and your family will fare in this. There is no guarantee. There is some record of success. I mean, there are lots of positive stories, but you don't know what happens in your life. We had over 100 people now through this program, which is quite a huge number compared to not having any choices before. So over 100 young adults and children, and everyone has a different story and comes with different, because the emotional side of OIT is, I would argue, as difficult, much probably more difficult than the physical side, because physical reactions you can manage. Emotional side, no one really talks about. So when you start any of such program, you have very different emotions kicking in, from extreme happiness to extreme questioning of your own decisions, because finally there could be a solution to your child or your own problem, which you never really were told about before. And yes, the outcomes can be very positive, but no, I guess you don't know how that's going to work out in your life. Another thing which I would say is very important when you're deciding about this is your time in life the right time for this type of process? Because I don't know how many of you have encountered a technique called the Silva method. The Silva method is like a mind technique where people use a lot of mind-based exercises to achieve outcomes. And in one of those exercises, there is a quote, I'm willing to get rid of all my prior beliefs before my wish will be, addressed or succeed. In this way as well, when you do this program, I would rely on that quote. You really have to get rid of a lot of emotional baggage which has existed before without you necessarily even being aware of it. So there really should be a psychological component of OIT addressed more explicitly, because whilst you're desensitizing, your mind is not desensitized. And even when you finish or your children finish the program, your mind hasn't been there yet. the mind follows much later. So a lot of those emotions still happen and still exist, and even the trauma and PTSD, or however psychologists would like to describe, that's still there. So even though you're eating at the end of the process food that once was killing you, with the potential to do it again, if your immune system is out of balance, you really always have to carry EpiPens and always have steroids and antihistamines on you, even with free eating in this particular protocol. Your mind it does funny things to you. It can be very happy or very cautious as well. There is also saying that the younger the children are, the success rate is higher. In this particular protocol, it doesn't really matter if you're an adult or a child, but what matters is discipline. And every time I had 2 children in the program, 1 child anaphylactic to nuts, 1 child to milk and egg. Every time I didn't follow the protocol for my daughter, it would backfire. But for my son, if I kind of deviated a little bit, somehow he was much younger, but somehow his body was fine. So not everybody will react in the same way, even within one family. So for example, also he's a late sleeper, and used to, because of other health issues, would wake up very late, and she would be bouncing from off the walls 6 a.m. ready to go to school. So then how do you manage your parenting skills and your own timetable in a day? When it comes to this program, maybe it's not a bad idea for all those families who did go to Utah or overseas to give themselves that space, because you wouldn't have school, you wouldn't have all the other commitments. When life happens at the same time, you have all sorts of commitments plus a very strict protocol to adhere to. And all the other parties and whatever else in life can happen, schoolwork and normal work. So dedicating time for, it's not a cliche to say for yourself. We've had children and teenagers, for example, in the program who are part of Australia's national squad for athletics. So they went internationally to compete. So the parent who is really in charge of the program for their family would literally fly with them to China, stay in a hotel next door, talk to the official organizers of this competition, do the dosing protocol, whilst the child had to do 30 hours a week of training and international competitions. But they've done it and they did it. So it proves that even with such a crazy schedule, dedicated, athletes have completed the program, because mothers were very, very dedicated to make it happen. And the world really has supported them as well, their own world. So the value of doing it close to home means that your support network still matters.
Thank you, Nina, for sharing your insight and experience with oral immunotherapy. We look forward to hearing more from you again in another